Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'll be kind of recapping Gameweek 7. So this was kind of the first really bad game week for me, and I imagine, of course, was quite similar for a lot of people who didn't, for example, wildcard into someone like FPL this week, and ultimately, yeah, I think I was bit very much by the fact that Chelsea lost that clean sheet and Christensen didn't play, but thankfully Livramento did, and of course, like many other people, I think we had a midfield who pretty much blanked. And of course, the captaincy was once again wrong, which is fair enough. I think we didn't expect necessarily Ronaldo to maybe not start, and so the plans have to change slightly in terms of, I think, how we can rely on maybe a United captaincy, I think, on a week-to-week basis. I've already been burned, I think, several weeks now by United, and I think just the lesson learned is simply just looking to Salah and realizing that he really, if you've been captaining him all season, to be honest, you would have been 20, 30, 40 points up to maybe, let's say, what I would be at right now. And it's very evident that that was a mistake for me so far. And I think maybe the reliance on maybe a team that I think isn't gelling right now, and trying to rely on players who are individually good, but I think are not, building too many chances in terms of their teams, is clearly hampering the way I see things. But of course, I think I would still back the Game Week 2 captaincy I did over Bruno because, I mean, they had a fantastic performance in Game Week 1. He had a fantastic performance in Game Week 1 as well. And with Salah at this point, I think you can say that Liverpool look like a fantastic team. I think it was incredibly exciting to watch them in the second half versus Man City. And what's exciting about that too is because we had just gotten the chance to see, for example, Chelsea suffer a lot versus City. And what we saw in the second half was that Liverpool still have a lot to give, right? By contrast. And of course, right now, I think, as we were saying at the start of the season, Salah will hugely benefit from the fact that the rest of his team is there in terms of most of the pieces being there, with exception to Trent right now, right? And so their ability now to play out the back and have much more possession of the ball and create more chances, and not have Salah, for example, to track back a little bit deeper than usual, and allow him to get much more advanced touches in the system, means that he will benefit a lot more. And also, not only that, I think Salah has improved immensely, I think, over the last 2 years in terms of how assistive he has been as a player, and this might really be his kind of breakout year in terms of whether he's actually considered as the best player in the world, because I think right now, form-wise, he really is. But Salah aside, and I think captaincy aside, we have to look at the rest of our team and see whether there are some kind of assessments to make. I think I was intending to go very quickly into a four at the back, and I think I still will actually. But I think the variation will probably be to go for a maybe double Man City backline. So for me, the temptation is to either go and drop Christensen for Cancelo this week and keep Cody in my team, because clearly Christensen is being rotated too much, and I don't really fancy perhaps Chelsea to keep a clean sheet versus Brentford, even though I know the subsequent game is going to be Norwich, which is probably very nice to have. I think, that there's a slight worry that maybe also with Chelsea focusing potentially in the Champions League, especially since they lost to Juventus, that Christensen would probably play in the game, versus Malmo. And potentially he could be rested once again for one of the kind of regular Premier League games, especially with Reece James maybe coming back into the side and actually being fit to play. So that's my general worry. I don't think I'd probably go into Azpilicueta for this point in time. I might choose to do that if I have to rethink it, but I think the idea is probably going to go into a Man City defender for this kind of game week ahead, and think about it in terms of the international break, maybe waiting to see whether or not an injury kind of appears for either Diaz or Cancelo, or if something significantly changes, Chelsea's kind of defensive backline, because I think I made the right transfer in terms of the medium term, in terms of going for Rudiger. Because I was really worried about whether Alonso would be rotated, and the truth is that he has been for Chilwell, who had a relatively good performance, right, versus Southampton. So I wouldn't really touch maybe Chelsea defense from my point of view. It could be going to Azpilicueta, to be honest, this week, but there's a fear, of course, that that's kind of chasing points and that the fixture isn't there. Whereas Man City, the fixture is clearly there for Cancelo to come in. And if I have to think about maybe getting Azpilicueta for Game Week 9, I could think about that, right, and maybe go for Cancelo and still go for that kind of back four, if let's say Trent is not kind of ready to play. So there's those kind of thoughts in mind. I think also my genuine plan was probably to move into players like Mbeumo and maybe Grealish in the near future, and probably replace Sarr, Benrahma and Jota quite soon. I still think Benrahma is quite exciting. Watford have also kind of changed their manager, right? They've dropped the manager, and we'll know over the international break that someone like Claudio Ranieri will come into the side, and maybe he could improve, what this Watford side can bring to the table. Because I think for the last few games, and the reason why Cisco has been fired is simply due to the fact that Watford have not been able to kind of create any successful attacks at all. Wage bill wise, they're actually probably a team that looks to stay within the mid table, or at least at the top of the bottom. And yeah, I think simply they just haven't been attacking at that level, and we know that perhaps we're a bit lucky to actually have the points from Sarr in the previous week. Regardless, though, I am looking still to probably move away from Sarr. I'm not sure if I'm going to be taking a hit now, but I think the interesting player for me right now, if I was to go into another player, would probably be Foden, to be honest. But I would still like to keep Jota, in my opinion, for the near future. I think also Hwang becomes a super interesting option to kind of move away from St. Maximan with. Because, for example, if let's say I don't want to double up in Brentford and I want to go for Mbemo over Tony, for example, then and I don't want to double up in Brentford, then clearly Hwang is a very, very good option. And him and Mbemo will become very, very nice enablers for me to actually get someone like Foden and then actually have a very solid bench so that when Foden doesn't play, I'll be totally fine. So those are kind of like the kind of medium-term plans in the future, those kind of assets and maybe rejigging around my forward line. I think those will kind of happen in subsequent game weeks and maybe game week 9 and 10. I might have to think about Sarr a little bit more immediately. I think Jota being subbed off for Firmino was a little bit expected around, I think, 65 minutes, right? He had just gotten a yellow card, and I think the game, maybe it's a Klopp's mind probably needed a little bit more energy in terms of, defending the midfield and being a bit more compact. But of course, that wasn't to happen because Kevin De Bruyne kind of collapsed Liverpool immediately at 2-2. But I think there's still a good chance for Watford to actually haul versus, for him to kind of haul versus Watford. And I'm not too concerned about maybe keeping him for that game. It could be the case where I just make that transfer for Cancelo, and then in the next week I do a double transfer out, or maybe just take a transfer out to go away from someone like Sarr, if he doesn't interest me after the Liverpool game. Because I think the Liverpool game will, if I let's say keep Sarr in the system, will be a good eye test for me to judge whether or not I want to keep Sarr. Because I think if let's say Watford put on a good performance versus Liverpool, I don't actually think the fixtures are as red as people think they are, right? So Everton, we know, can be penetrated by some teams. Southampton, I think the same as well when you're playing at home, and then I think I can make a decision there after the Southampton game whether or not to drop Sarr, right? I think obviously the Liverpool game is going to be a tough game, but they're still playing at home, and you never know with a new manager. You can always have like a very green period, which is very surprising. But I don't have high expectations for that. But I just don't really want to take a hit because I think unless Rafinha comes into the team and becomes an interesting option, then I can maybe think about that a little bit longer. And maybe it'll also give me some time to see whether or not Foden is going to be starting, subsequent games. And then I can maybe think about that kind of -4 in the week after. Because I think I'm very likely to not make a move in the midfield this week just because I think I want Rafinha in my team as well. So the team should be kind of Rafinha, Mbemo, and Foden in the near future. And that will be kind of my midfield four. And the forward can probably be changed between either Tony or Hwang at this point. I'm not too into Jimenez still. I think he's actually, as I said, become a very assistive asset. And you can see he's the one who's dropping a little bit further behind to actually lay in balls in behind. And what's nice is Hwang, as opposed to Traore, is much more clinical, as we've seen in the few games. Yes, we've had a small sample size, but I think we've seen it even in games that where he's played very, very little minutes, that he's much more direct in terms of his shots on goal. And it makes a huge difference compared to Traore, who gets into great XG positions, but clearly won't be able to kind of finish those chances. So Hwang becomes super interesting, especially at his price. And that's kind of my mind on things right now. It's a little bit disappointing to see Christensen not play, but ultimately I guess I was actually better for it because Livramento came on. Ronaldo, of course, probably is still the plan to kind of move out in game week 9. Some hits might have to come in the future so that I kind of upgrade my midfield to make sure that I don't fall too far behind the pack. But I think there's still time, right? Because Mbemo doesn't have great fixtures until maybe 9 or 10. So that's fine. I can kind of wait for that. Sarr is the question mark. So I think if Rafinha is ready, I might make a -4 to go for Rafinha potentially. There's an option there. And I think Jota I can hold on for a week so I can maybe move into someone like Foden the week after that. Just to kind of assess what the situation is with Grealish and Foden. Because, you'll have Champions League fixtures where, for example, we saw Foden not start versus PSG. And then you'll have fixtures like, let's say, the last two matches between Chelsea and Liverpool, where Foden was a very core and key option, I think, for both games, especially the Liverpool one, where once again we saw him decimate Liverpool at times, or at least create very, very effective chances. So those are that's kind of where my mind is right now. In terms of looking at the price changes, I'd probably like to say that I think Cancelo moving up in price is, of course, something that I'm wary of. I have enough money in the bank to kind of deal with the fact that he's going to hit a price rise. I think Hwang the same kind of thing there. I wouldn't mind getting Hwang at 5.6, 5.7 at the kind of rate that he's going at, in terms of goal scoring. So no real issues there. And I think part of it too is a lot of wild cards. So we don't know necessarily whether these kind of price rises will go through as they stand. But I think we also have some kind of price drops in terms of Richarlison and Bailey. Nothing too interesting there. And Calvert-Lewin probably dropping again, which is probably going to be healthy when maybe there's a later stage in the season where we can go back into him. But I think for the most part now, the worry as well with Cancelo is, and the reason why I don't want to go for him is because Pep did mention that Zinchenko would be coming back soon. And if that's the case, then it probably makes more sense for me to go into Diaz and maybe play a bit safer with my backline, because I don't think Diaz is going to fall too far away from Cancelo in terms of points. I've already been bitten very much by having a player who's very rotation prone. I'm not saying Cancelo is nearly as rotation prone as Christensen. I think clearly Cancelo is someone who is relied on by Pep, but we're not going to be sure whether he is going to play consistent minutes, especially since maybe the priority is going to be in the Champions League, right? Because if you look at the situation in the kind of Champions League group of Man City, especially after they lost to PSG, Club Brugge is actually in quite a good position. So that next fixture is going to be quite a big match. You don't know whether he's going to maybe rest players for the Burnley match, which is considerably, I would say, easier in terms of expectations for the season than someone like Club Brugge, who that's a must-win match for them. And we've seen some managers already play their A team, right? So, for example, Tuchel deliberately rotating players in a Premier League game so that he can actually play a full-strength side versus Zenit as an example. So that's kind of where my mind is at right now. Nothing too crazy in terms of price rises and falls. I'm not going to kind of bite the bullet right now and go for a transfer. We have 2 weeks to make decisions, and I'll be making a lot of content for you guys as the week rolls ahead. Overall, terrible game week for me. I hope you guys had much better weeks. Hopefully, if you guys had Arsenal and Brighton assets, maybe had Jimenez potentially as well in your team, or even had a Salah captaincy, which is obviously a bit of an outside shout. But yeah, hope you guys had a wonderful game week, and I'll see you guys very shortly for some more videos.